personal attack.
Nonviolent, but many were angry.
Dr. King was only trying to say to America, trying to say to Gage Park, we are human beings. I am a citizen of this city. I'm a black American. I have a right to move wherever I want to move, if I have the money to move it. What's wrong with that, And I think that's what it was all about. It was that I dare one part of this society to say that you can't move wherever you want to move. I think that was the anger that was in us.
There's a possibility that we might get arrested.
Acting on his own, Jesse Jackson announced a march into Cicero, a white suburb known for racial hostility. His challenge caught both city officials and movement leaders off guard.
Is any one individual, or any one leader, any one group of leaders worth the perpetuation of the historical deprivation of Negro people? That's the question that we have to deal with. And I have counted up the cost. My life, Bever's life, even Dr. King's life, over and against a generation and the continuation of a kind of sin that's going to internally disrupt this country and possibly this world. I've counted the cost. I'm going to Cicero.
You don't know what Cicero meant to people in Chicago. You don't go under the viaduct, honey, because if you do, you may not get back. Cicero was on the other side of the viaduct. And you didn't walk through Cicero alone. You didn't let your car break down in Cicero and get out to change your tire.
15,000 blacks worked in Cicero. None lived there.
There's a lot of good ones here that work here, but still we don't want to mix with them to live with them.
Why? You work with them?
But I don't want to live with them.
Why?
Because I moved out of a neighborhood that was colored. I had to move. Everybody that lives with the colored has to move.
Why?
Because you're not safe walking the streets at night. You cannot leave the house.
Negroes have a right to move in under the Constitution. The only thing is, what kind of a Negro?
The Cicero community has been a very hostile community to blacks for years, ever since I could remember. And I looked forward to the time that I could march down those streets and in defiance of all those people there.
There was a lot of fear in the white community and some parts of the black community that there was going to be some sort of big racial explosion. There were a lot of demands on the part of the citizens, particularly the white citizens, on Mayor Daley to stop the marches. There were some demands on the part of the black leadership to Martin Luther King to stop the marches. So you see, everybody wanted a way out. Both sides wanted a way out.
Religious leaders led the call for a citywide summit that would stop the marches. King agreed to negotiate, but he vowed to continue marching until a settlement was reached.
I don't mind saying to Chicago or to anybody, I'm tired of marching. Tired of marching for something that should have been mine at birth. I don't mind saying to you tonight, I don't mind saying to you tonight that I'm tired of the tension surrounding our days. I don't mind saying to you tonight that I'm tired of living every day under the threat of death. I have no martyr complex. I want to live as long as anybody in this building tonight, and sometimes I begin to doubt whether I'm going to make it through. I must confess I'm tired.
King and his staff had hoped their campaign in Chicago would serve as a model for others in the North. But their work in Chicago had failed to win support from former allies, including the federal government and Northern liberals. It was time to move on.
SCLC went to Chicago to see if nonviolence would work in the North. And so we were doing a number of things. The marches were only one. But Chicago was so much bigger than any city that we'd worked in the South. We knew we couldn't do them all at the same time, and that we couldn't sustain an aggressive movement as long as, much longer. So we were trying to find a way to wind it up.
We reached a point in which we thought that we had achieved not everything we wanted, but everything we could achieve. And there were those who disagreed with that. But we had the burden of decision. We made the best one we could, as honestly as we could, with all the suspicions that were shared by those of us who were criticizing us.
August 26, 1966. Both sides signed a 10-point agreement. The city promised to enforce its open housing laws and desegregate public housing. Banks and realtors agreed to comply. Critics doubted the agreement would be enforced, but King saw it as a first step. He agreed to stop the marches, including the march into Cicero.
The Chicago Freedom Movement has pledged its resources to assist in the implementation of these programs and hereby agrees to halt neighborhood marches and demonstrations in Chicago on the issue of open housing, so long as these...
King's announcement immediately split the Chicago movement.
When he called off the march, we were surprised. We were shocked. This is the march we looked forward to. The other marches were nice, but the one in Cicero has special meaning for us.
We don't care about summits taking place without us. We don't care about covenants. We want contracts in black and white with some hard answers for us, with some signatures, and some people we can hold responsible to, and some time frames. But none of this was there.
Local groups announced their own march into Cicero. It would take place without Jesse Jackson or Dr. King.
We are not marching into Cicero to appeal to the white conscience, but to demonstrate to everybody that rank and file people now are a new breed, a new kind of cat. Without fear, we do not come, hat in hand, scratching our heads, shuffling our feet to beg for a few concessions. In this march, we are serving notice. Beginning today, every Negro conceives, act, and live out the assumption that he can walk anywhere, that he is a human like anybody and is to be treated like anybody else.
The day that the march took place, Dr. King called me at home, and he said to me, you know, Bob, we would like to save Cicero to use it, you know, later on for something, and that I wish that you know, wouldn't go. And I told Dr. King, I said, well, Doc, that, you know, my conscience, you know, dictates to me that I must lead the march into Cicero.
We got there, and it was such few, we became a little frightened. And we kept standing around, and finally it was 12 o'clock, I believe it was 12 o'clock, and all of a sudden, guys start getting out of cars and people start coming out of doorways, and they said, okay, Lucas, step off time.
About 250 marchers began walking into Cicero. Over 3,000 law enforcement agents were on hand.
Well, it was not a King march. You know, we just went out there on faith. We just went, little people. And that was the difference. It was a groundswell of grassroots people. And when they threw bricks, they got them back. We caught them and we threw them back. So it was give and take in Cicero for a mile or so. And I'll never forget it.
As the marchers left Cicero, little had been resolved. The Southern civil rights victories had not been repeated in the North. The problems and the anger remained. The tension building between black and white America would explode with greatest force in Detroit, Michigan. Motown, USA. In 1967, Detroit was booming. Federally funded urban renewal brought highways and skyscrapers. The auto industry brought employment. But success looked different to Detroit's black community. Urban renewal built expressways through black neighborhoods. It took jobs and resources to white suburbs. It left black residents behind.
The expressway divided the community. When you could walk across the street and talk to your neighbor, it's no longer there. You gotta go across a bridge, and if you go across that bridge, you ain't gonna find that same neighbor because that street is gone. All those houses in that neighborhood is gone.
You constantly saw white guys on the assembly line, foremen in white shirts, who would leave and who would drive to a better neighborhood, who would drive a better car, and so forth. And there wasn't the opportunity there. There wasn't the opportunity.
Opportunity came with power. In Detroit, that meant white power. It was symbolized by a police force that was 95% white. Generations of black residents had contended with police, especially four-man squads known as the Big Four.
When the Big Four pulled up, you jumped. I mean, when they said move off the corner, you moved off the corner. And where do young black men have but a corner? They don't have swimming pools, they don't have estates. They have corners in cities. And they stand around, they harmonize, they clown, they have fun. But when the Big Four would say, give me that corner, you gave them that corner, or else.
And it wasn't unusual to see that the cops coming into neighborhoods and just arbitrarily grabbing people, you know, without any kind of provocation, and slam us up against the wall, ask us for identification, where you're going, what you've been doing. Any kind of suspicion whatsoever would be cause for them to just go ahead and accost you.
Police community tension was near combustion by the summer of 1967. The spark came on July 23rd. Police conducted a routine raid on a blind pig, an illegal after-hours club.
This particular time, there was more there than the crew expected. It required shuttling several times from the station to the scene, taking prisoners back and forth. And the crowd became restive, and what was kind of a mood of hilarity grew into some derisive talk to the police, and ultimately was stoning the cars.
That's why the Negroes riding all up down there, you understand me? And all these police, every time you see one of them, he gonna stop a brother, he don't never stop no white. That's why we out here riding, and we gonna keep on riding until they stop all this.
It was Sunday morning. Few police were in the area. Reinforcements were called in as the growing crowd began looting and burning.
The feeling in the streets at that time, the kind of sense of euphoria, you know, a sense of freedom and rebellion. Everybody felt like unified, that, you know, the revolution was right around the corner, because we had been talking about those things in the community anyway. So everybody felt that this was the catalyst, this was the charge, this was the igniter.
When my daughter got to church, she called back and said, Mama, it's Judgment Day. I said, what you mean? She said, everything is burning. I said, why? She said, they say there's a riot going on, and I almost had a fit behind that.
Moderate black leaders offered to help police. Dr. Arthur Johnson drove into the area with Congressman John Conyers.
The crowd, the whole scene was such that I could not drive my car further. John Conyers finally got out of the car, stood on the hood of it, and attempted to speak to the people about leaving the street and returning to their homes. And finally, I got out of my car. I whispered in John's ear, I would like to get my car out of here if I can.
The city was burning, and all the work that we had done was being destroyed. The distress was more than distress. It was agony, and tears came to my eyes. And it was, we thought we had the answers. And the fact is, nobody had the answers.
Inside of most black people, there was a time bomb. There was a pot that was about to overflow, and there was rage that was about to come out. And the rebellion just provided an opportunity for that. I mean, why else would people get upset about cops raiding a blind pig? They've done that numerous times before, but people just got tired. People just got tired of it. And it just exploded.
Defend your homes and protect your own property. It's the best thing you can do. Protect your own property. Protect your own property. That's the most thing to do right now.
12 hours after the initial police raid, Governor George Romney called in the Michigan National Guard. 7,000 guardsmen began arriving as night fell. Most were young, white, and heavily armed. They had little or no training in riot control. 100 city blocks were in turmoil.
It looked like a war-torn zone. That's all you could think of was, my God, this is 20 miles from where I live, and they've dropped a bomb. That was what you saw on television, and what you heard in the community was, why are they doing this? Why are they doing this?
This is a racial incident. It represents a racial rebellion that goes from coast to coast. In the city of Detroit, it represents one simple thing. Black people want control of black communities.
Despite a 9 p.m. curfew, thousands of people were on the street.
Hardware store was being looted by a lot of people, apparently people who lived in that community. And a carload of brothers rolled up, and they asked everyone, had they gotten enough, and did they need anything else? And people said, finally said no after they had gotten what they wanted. And so these brothers said fine, and so they got everybody out of the store, and they firebombed it, and they left. They didn't take anything themselves.
The cry in the air was, let's burn this place down, let's torch it. This sucker was always ripping us off anyway, you know. They never hired many black people, you know, so it's kind of anger and frustration was in the wind.
Protected by police and guardsmen, firefighters faced an onslaught of rocks and debris. Reports of gunfire increased through the night. Police suspected snipers.
There must be some kind of way out of here. Say the joker to the thief. There's too much confusion. I can't get no relief.
We smell smoke. Those people's house across the street is on fire. I don't see nobody. Everybody in that block got along fine. I don't know nobody in that block with the children's even out. They played nice together. I don't see why this had to happen.
There were fires going on. There was a great deal of excitement. Street lights were being shot out by the police. There was a great deal of noise, a great deal of confusion. Nobody knew where their parent organizations were. The entire situation was one of semi-controlled chaos. Everybody was uptight, very uptight.
I was afraid of being shot by National Guardsmen. I was afraid of being shot by police officers, and I was afraid of being shot by looters and rioters. I was afraid of being shot, period.
In an atmosphere fed by rumors and fear, everyone was at risk.
Going into the fire intention store, we didn't know what danger we were in. And I hear this officer say, police officer say, all of you black motherfuckers come off from back there. Well, I immediately get up and come to the door, you know, head for the door, the archway of the door, to do what he says. When I'm told, I hear a voice, and one of my neighbors, I knew it was her voice, and she told me, don't go out there, come back, come back. And at that time, I went to turn to go back and get there next to her behind this boat end of carpeting. And I just remember seeing a flash of light at that time and going back there to lay down on a boat end, to wake up, I guess, a couple of days later, and to hear a doctor telling my mother that the bullet had injured my spine and I probably wouldn't walk again.
Get out of the way. Come on, get out of the way.
By Monday morning, hundreds had been injured. 6 people were dead. 4 had been shot. 2 others died in fires.
The growing sense of concern in the community was that the situation was out of hand, that no one knew where it was going, when it would end, or even how to end it.
As Governor of the state of Michigan, I do hereby officially recommend the immediate deployment of federal troops into Michigan to assist state and local authorities.
During the night, Governor Romney had called U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark to recommend that President Johnson send federal troops.
And he indicated that we would get federal assistance, that the troops would be made available. Then he called us back several hours later to indicate that he'd have to have a written statement indicating that the riot was completely beyond our ability to control. Well, the difficulty of that was that it would have nullified all of the insurance policies over the whole area. So, and furthermore, we didn't know with certainty we couldn't control it. We thought we might not be able to. So I indicated that to him.
Finally, they reached a compromise, and Johnson decided that a number of us would go to Detroit. And he started telling us, and occasionally he would be on the phone to Fort Bragg, to the general in charge of the 82nd Airborne. And one thing he kept saying, I don't want bullets in those guns. I don't want our troops to have bullets in those guns. And he went on, and he just got himself all worked up. And he said, I don't want anybody to say that my troops shot a pregnant net. And he looked at me, and his face went red, and then he finished his sentence without finishing that word. And as he then sent us out to go and pack and then go over to Andrews Air Force Base.
4,700 paratroopers from the 101st and 82nd Airborne Divisions began arriving Monday afternoon. Soldiers from these same units had been sent to protect black school children in Little Rock in 1957 and James Meredith at Ole Miss in 1962. At the president's order, they would not be deployed in Detroit unless absolutely necessary. Johnson's envoys assessed the situation.
The mass net guards had been very spotty. There had been much too much indiscriminate shooting. They had shot out the street lights, which is the worst thing you can do in a situation like that, because that makes it even more likely that the law enforcement people are going to be shot at. It creates a fear in the community. It creates fear, really, in the enforcement officials as well, so that it was not going well when we arrived.
Looting and burning had continued into the second day. Firefighters from over 35 communities were on the streets. Police arrested 3,900 people by Monday night. There was no end in sight.
I was totally wiped out. It got to a point where I had to watch out for my temper. It got to a point where those persons who were yelling and screaming about down with the whitey and all of that, I was looking into his eyes wanting to knock the hell out of him because he didn't know what the hell he was talking about.
I got a chance to sneak a phone call home one night just to let my parents know it was all right, because it had been 3 or 4 days since I'd let them know what was going on. And my mother expressed a thought then, I guess it's stuck in my mind ever since. She said, here I have one son in Vietnam in a combat zone, and now I'm worried about you in our own hometown, you know, downtown Detroit.
At 11:20 Monday night, President Johnson sent the federal troops into Detroit. They were ordered to carry unloaded weapons. At least 19 people had died since the raid on the Blind Pig.
Sergeant, you've just recently returned from Vietnam. Could you tell us how it feels to have to come from one zone of combat in a foreign land to one in your own land?
It's not a good feeling, not one I'm kind of proud of, but it's a job, it's a duty. They have to be done, and it's something different.
Did you ever expect this kind of call when you joined the service?
I expected calls, but it kind of surprised me when I got there that morning, and they said, fall out with all your gear, you're going. And I said, where?
Clearly the presence of a large number of National Guardsmen and federal troops, along with a bolstered police department that had an armed presence out there. So the looting was all over. The curfew had been put into effect.
In total, there were 17,000 law enforcement people in Detroit. The disorder was 3 days old. Much of the looting and burning had ended. But exhausted and still heavily armed, National Guardsmen and state and local police continued their patrols.
One night, a black co-worker and I were driving up Grand River, which is a major artery in Detroit. And we're about to turn left onto Joy Road when all of a sudden we realized that this convoy of state police cars had made a U-turn and were pulling us over. So I came out of the car with my hands up, and what I saw was I was circled by people with long guns and pistols, and they were all pointing at me, and they were all nervous people, and they were all white. And I'm a black guy, and I'm a high government official, but I was a nigger in white America, and I thought at that moment I was going to be dead. 35 years old and dead at the corner of Joy Road and Grand River.
Within days, police arrested 7,200 people. Most were young black men.
The police stations were all overrun and the jails were filled, so they just created detention centers. So people were calling up, reporting what the police were doing or did, reporting missing people, people wanting to file complaints, fear, anger. Could this be happening in America?
At least 2 people died when National Guardsmen, fearing snipers, sprayed buildings with gunfire.
Like we were in Vietnam or something, all this excitement, and boy, I was panicked, and I told my husband about it, and then he says, get on that floor, and I ran on the floor. Then we went in this woman's apartment, and then the noise, the cop says to come outside, put your hands on your head.
And I opened the door, and there were about 4 or 5 National Guardsmen, all young, all white, looking around with rifles and bayonets. And this one guy, he says, we heard some shooting here. And everybody who had been shot up to this point that we had heard about, they all said that they had a gun and that they were shooting at the police. That became the line. This guy was a sniper, he was shooting at the police. And I knew that if I was shot, if my family was shot, that they could have closed the door in this apartment and nobody would have ever known what happened.
As the nightmare in Detroit began to end, the press uncovered a story about 3 young black men killed during a police raid at the Algiers Motel. Murder charges were brought against a white police officer. 2 other officers and a black security guard were also implicated. There were no convictions.